Hi, it's Raederle, and this is going to be my first official vlog. So the idea of a vlog is that it's unrehearsed and I'm just going to talk about my life. Man, I'm nervous. Alright, well, recently I've been working on writing an article on autism. At least that's what I thought I was doing. I thought I was just going to write a quick little 10 or 20 page article for my website. And then I thought it would be really useful because I could link people to it and say, hey, this is what autism is about. Here's some things you should know. Here's some things you should know about me in particular. That was the idea. That, I think, started November 17th. It's now December 15th of 2020 if you're watching this in the future. So, yeah. So the first day I wrote 10 pages. I'm a little bit of a prolific writer, if you hadn't guessed. The research just kept going. I was watching at first 5 or 10 videos on autism every day, and then I was taking those videos, the best of them, and I was putting them into a playlist, a YouTube playlist called Talks on Autism. And I was only adding probably the best video out of 5 or 6 that I watched, only the really good ones that I would say, hey, you should watch this to understand autism better or understand neurodiversity better. Yeah, that playlist is up to 16 videos. Now, if that means that I've watched 16 times 5 videos on autism, yeah, you can do the math. I'm not going to. That's a lot of research just in the video front. Beyond that, I've been doing a ton of reading. I've been digging through all kinds of papers. Yesterday, I actually spent an hour just looking up, trying to find one statistic. I just wanted to write one sentence about whether or not asexuality really genuinely was more prevalent in people who are autistic or not. I've kept seeing that written, but I wasn't finding the study because there weren't citations. So eventually I found the study, and sure enough, it is more prevalent. Wow! And so are lots of other things. I mean, pretty much everything that's atypical clumps together. I already actually noticed this phenomena back when I was going to raw food potlucks. When I was 20, I became a raw foodist, and when I was 21, I became kind of a co-organizer of a raw food potluck group thing in Buffalo. So sometimes I was going to 3 potlucks a month, and I was also going to them when I traveled. While I was going to all these raw food potlucks and meeting lots of raw foodists, I met a lot of really interesting people. I mean, that's how I met the owner of the Vegetarian Health Institute, who I ended up working for 5 years as their chief editor, and that's how I met all kinds of other amazing people. I met John Kohler. He has 3 different YouTube channels. He's a very accomplished person. I started noticing that these people, they weren't just unusual in terms of choosing an unusual diet, they were unusual in terms of unusual lifestyles across the board, people who just decided they were going to up and live in Hawaii for, a few years on the beach in a tent, or people who decided to start a business, or people who had unusual relationship styles such as polyamory. And so I thought, well, it makes sense that things that are unusual would clump together, because if you're willing to, try a diet that's completely different, yeah, that's a huge change. I mean, people who change their religion find it to be less difficult and less of a shock to their system than people who change to a completely different diet where every meal that they're eating changes. And so people who are capable of that kind of change in their diet, it's nothing for them to, try out a new way of, doing their dental hygiene like I did, or, any number of other things. Unusual things seem to clump together. But it turns out that actually plays out in neurology. I mean, the comorbidities, or just co-occurrences, as I would prefer to say, because I would prefer not to say a word that includes morbid in it. But the co-occurrences with autism are virtually every neurological difference you can imagine. So that's been huge freaking study. I read so many pages on Wikipedia. There was this one day where I spent all day reading about Tourette's and different tic syndromes. There was a day where I was reading about epilepsy. There's been days trying to connect dots between being a highly sensitive person and autism. There's been a lot of days just sort of puzzling out this whole, the clinical side of it is saying that autism is a disorder and that it's all full of deficits. And then you've got individuals with autism who are saying, hey, I wouldn't change this for the world. This is a gift, and yes, it comes with some difficulties, but it also comes with profound benefits. So just kind of working that all out and coming up with my own opinions and feelings and perspective has been what I've been up to for nearly a solid month now. My article is now 90 freaking pages long. Just doing the HTML would take me probably 3 solid days, so I don't know if I'm going to turn this all into one web page. That would just be a lot of freaking scrolling. Of course, I would use pagination so that you could, click a link and go to another part of the page. That's part of why the HTML would be so intense. There would be intense pagination, all these different headers and formatting, and I got to add images and stuff to break it up and make it interesting and engaging and kind of hold people's attention for that long. But I mean, in reality, nobody's going to sit down and read 90 pages at once. Okay, maybe they would. I wouldn't. I'm not a speed reader. In fact, I have dyslexia and I'm a slow reader. So maybe I'm writing a book. I very well be writing a book, because it turned out that the subject of autism is the subject of neurodiversity. You can't just look at autism and zoom up on it and look closely at it, because it's too broad to zoom up on. If you're looking at autism, you're looking at a broad topic. In fact, after I already came up with the idea that autism wasn't just one thing, just from my, I came up with that in the first couple days of research. It took me a whole month of research to finally start finding, other people who have their own terms for it. I found this one blog who calls it the pluralism of autism. He's like, there's the autisms. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. You could use those words. I would prefer to just say, hey, autism's nearly synonymous with neurodiversity. Anyways, I thought I was going to be talking about my life, but my life's been obsessing about the subject of neurodiversity for the last month. So I guess practically what that means, to just give you kind of an idea of what my life actually has been like, is I've been getting out of bed in the morning and then coming over here, all of 4 steps, and sitting down on this ottoman that's very comfortable, and then working on my article for I'm looking at my clock. For some reason that helps me think about time. From about 8 a.m., maybe 8:30 on most days, to about noon or 1 o'clock. And then around then, I usually go get some food. And then I check in with myself. Do I have a headache? If I have a headache, then I'm done for the day. No more writing or researching. Time to maybe watch some neat videos on autism, but nothing too intense. And then maybe do some drawing. So this is a painting I started with watercolors a while back, but I couldn't get the values right for some reason. I'm just either not skilled enough with watercolors, or I couldn't get the watercolors dark enough in the foreground. So I came back during this past week and I added ink to the foreground, and I've also done some greater shadings with colored pencils. I still have some more I want to do to get it the way I wanted to call it finished, but it's pretty close now. I'm pretty happy with it. This was actually just I did this literally just to experiment with perspective and values, and having it dark in the foreground and having it fade to really light in the background. Just thought it'd be fun because I saw some pictures done like that, thought they were really pretty. I've been reading this book, The Social Animal, so if I draw for a while my hands start to hurt, so particularly if I'm using colored pencils, it's so intense, coloring really hard, and I want to use that technique where you use rubbing alcohol to kind of turn it into paint, except for I'm really sensitive to the smell of rubbing alcohol. Man, it sucks having MCS and being an artist. So many techniques I want to try. I would love to get into spray paint art one day. Probably won't ever happen. Anyways, so I've been reading The Social Animal. A friend gave this to me back for my birthday, which is January, which means a whole 11 months ago a friend gave this to me. And it's been the perfect counterpoint to the autism research, because this is all about really socially capable, neurotypical person, how they might excel in life and how being social might actually make up for having a average or even below average IQ. How just being, a determined, socially capable, physically active human being works, why it works, and why you can thrive like that. So it's a perfect intellectual counterpoint. I've been really enjoying it. It's super well written. It's full of all kinds of information, some of which I didn't know, some of which I learned from other books. So for example, I read the book a few years ago called What Do Women Want? I thought it was going to be a little bit more philosophical or something, but it's actually just about studies on women where they stick a device inside a woman's, and then it measures her level of lubrication, and then they have her watch videos to see whether or not she's getting aroused watching them, and they found out that women get wet to virtually everything, monkeys having sex or whatever, but they would actually report that they weren't getting aroused. Interestingly, similar studies on men showed that men they reported that they were getting aroused when they were getting a boner, whereas women had that disconnect because you might be getting wet and not even notice. It makes sense. Anyways, those types of things, like he just slipped that in there. Like that was like a one sentence in this book. So there's lots of studies and other books kind of summarized in like 2 sentences in The Social Animal. So that's been really fun seeing, things I knew and things I didn't know. I need some water. The little notebook I have next to the side of my bed, if like late at night I have this idea that might go into my article or whatever, I write it down in here, and then once I've added it, I scratch it off. So lots of autism research and writing in the morning, followed by drawing or reading a book. You know what I've been reading that's really freaking good? I just finished reading it. I cried so many times. Okay, so something you probably don't know about me is that I have a policy that if a fiction book opens up with something about death or something gory or awful in the first paragraph, I'm done with that book, because there are books I wish I had never started reading because they are so depressing and so dark. And if I had just taken that first paragraph as a warning, then I wouldn't still have those stories coming up into my head years later. There's definitely movies and books and stuff that leave these images in my head as if I went through something really traumatic. I get worked up about this subject because it's really painful to have all this crap stuck in my head from sometimes movies I saw when I was a young child and from books I read 5, nearly 10 years ago in some cases, and I would just like to stop polluting my brain. So all of that is a prerequisite to saying that you would not expect me to be reading a book called A Deadly Education because, and it even does, the first sentence actually is pretty dark. It's this really cool diagram on the front. I decided that Orion needed to die after the second time he saved my life. That is a really interesting, catchy statement to open a book with, so I understand why she opened the book with that statement, but yeah, I was like, oh shiznick, this would make me normally decide that I should not read this book. It was Naomi Novik. So Naomi Novik is the author of the Temeraire series, which is dragons in the Napoleonic Wars. It's really strategically fascinating, and it's also, because the dragons are intelligent, it's also a lot about the relationships that people are having between these two species and how different cultures handled the species. Obviously the Chinese have a very different relationship with the dragons than the British or the Africans, and the series kind of just goes all around the world exploring different cultures in that time period and the relationships with dragons. It explores so much. It's a great book, book series for young people. And then she wrote Uprooted and Spinning Silver. And Spinning Silver is one of my favorite all-time books. Yeah, it was Naomi Novik, so I trust her as an author. Yeah, sometimes her books are a little bit dark, but at least it's always worth it. So my problem with A Game of Thrones was that it wasn't worth it. After 2.5 books, I gave in and gave up because what was I getting out of it? What meaningful things had happened? What precious moments had occurred? What intellectual knowledge was I gaining? Nothing. Yeah, it was exciting, but it was exciting and depressing, traumatizing. And there was actually a really touching scene, and the guy ends up getting killed the next chapter. Yeah, so that was really painful, and it was very memorably painful, and I was really disappointed because I assumed that if an author was that good at writing, that they would actually have something meaningful to share. Nope. Just an epic, depressing adventure. So, yeah. But Naomi Novik's not like that. Yes, there's violence, and sometimes there's gore, and I just sort of skim over anything that's graphically described. That's one of the things I like about reading, is you can kind of see where a sentence is going, and you can just kind of skip that sentence real quick and not actually let it get into your imagination, or at least I can kind of usually do that, hopefully. In her books, there's always one profound point after another, and lots of intellectual stimulation, and lots of touching moments, so it's just really worth it to have a little bit of darkness in there. And I think the only reason she honestly puts that in there is just because people like it. Ick. So I read it, and it turned out to be such a good choice to go ahead and read it because it's so beautiful. She's getting better and better with every book she writes. It just keeps getting deeper and deeper. At first when I was reading this, I was like, wow, this is going to be the next Harry Potter, because it's like Harry Potter except for if everything was better, if the characters actually had depth, if the setting was even 10 times more interesting, which is Harry Potter's strength, and yet this book does it even better. If you made the plot more interesting and more believable, the setting more interesting and more believable, the characters more believable and more deep and more interesting, and added all kinds of realistic, touching moments, that's what this is. But then as I was reading, it actually got so good that I started to have my doubts. I was like, no, people don't actually have this good taste. Nothing this good ever becomes that popular. I hate to say it, but it's true. So it probably won't be the next Harry Potter, unfortunately, even though it's so good and deserves to be that popular. Anyway, I digress, but the book made me cry like 7 times, and at the end I just had like tears streaming down my face. And Greg came into the room like as I had just finished the book, and he's like, oh, what's wrong? The book, it's so sweet. So yeah, and then of course now I'm sad that it's over, because this was like my go-to. I had finished writing for the day, and then I'd be like, yes, I want to go read this. But now I finished it, and book 2 doesn't come out until June. It's, I guess, a 2-book series, so there's only going to be 2 of them. So no waiting for 10 books to come out or anything crazy like that. What else is new in my life? I'm already up to 20 minutes of rambling, so I probably should just wrap this up. But, oh, what else is new in my life? Air plants! Look at my new friends. So I've got like a bunch of air plants behind me. This is my new family of air plants, and I actually have the bathtub full right now to water these babies. So this is called the Xerographica. It's actually an endangered species. I had to basically ban people from harvesting these from the rainforest, as, well, they were running out. And so now they're all farm raised. So I've obviously got mine from an ethical company that raises theirs. They actually raise theirs from seed, which it takes 8 years roughly to get one this big. So this is actually an 8-year-old plant, believe it or not. I just love them. They have like this nice, like very faint smell. They clean the air. They're touchable. You can go around. A gorgeous decoration. A lot of people say they're low maintenance. I don't know what the hell people are thinking when they say that. I think people who actually have a number of air plants realize they're not low maintenance, because I have a lot of houseplants, and these are way more maintenance, because you have to gather them all up and then soak them in water for like an hour, either every 10 days or every week, depending on the humidity in your house. You can just spritz them with water, but I don't think that gets them as healthy. I used to have an air plant that I used to do that with, and it died. I do keep my room more humid. I do have a water fountain running all the time, and then on top of that I have a humidifier that runs on a timer, so it just turns on for like little 15-minute durations for, throughout the day. It goes off probably 15 minutes out of 2 hours. I turn it up or down, like the amount of times it goes off. Like I turn it down to nothing during the summer when it's already humid, and then I gradually have it run more frequently over the course of the winter as it gets more dry. I do have some humidity in my room, so maybe I can get away with putting them in the bathtub less often. And I need to use the bathtub because I bought so many of them. I've been thinking about doing this for years. It's a bit of an effort just gathering them all up and bringing them to the bathtub, and then I have to set them out somewhere to dry, and then you have to make sure they dry fully. And they also apparently like rainwater, so in this case I used rainwater from our rainwater collection system, put it into buckets, and then brought the buckets up to the bathtub and put the buckets in the bathtub. This is kind of crazy, obsessive, but, I guess when you don't have children, you find something you want to nurture, right? I could tell you about recent dating adventures or other things that are going on in my life, but I think 20 minutes is long enough for a video. Hopefully I can edit this down to 20 minutes, so I'll have to wait until the next vlog. So thank you so much for joining, my lovelies. I really appreciate your watching, and I also really appreciate it when you give me a like and subscribe and all that other good stuff. And hopefully I'll have an article about neurodiversity up on my website soon. Maybe if I think about it, I'll actually add a link to that below this video, but of course it'll be on Raederle.com, and you'll be able to search for it in the search feature at the top. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Oh, and P.S. comment and let me know, are vlogs interesting? You know what's amazing about spending 5 hours preparing lots of amazing food for Thanksgiving? Leftovers.